Republican Senator Joni Ernst joining me live from Capitol Hill. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. I first want to ask you about your reaction to Israel moving into eastern Rafah, and how does this impact ceasefire negotiations?
Yeah, thank you, Selena, very much. And I was able to be with the Prime Minister in Israel over the weekend, and we discussed the actions in Rafah. Number one, we have to get the hostages back. We still have 8 American hostages that are being held. 3 of them are deceased, as we know, but 5 we believe are still living. Israel feels that this is the only opportunity they have to take out Hamas. This is the leverage they have to get those hostages back. And when they feel that America and other allies have abandoned them, they have to figure out what works best for them. Joe Biden has been signaling to the administration in Israel that we do not have the ironclad stance to stand by them that Joe Biden proclaims. He has stated that he will withhold ammunition from Israel, and that is very unfortunate. It truly caught us off guard as we were visiting in Israel with the Prime Minister. But again, they need leverage to work against Hamas. We cannot forget that it was Hamas that perpetrated those crimes on October 7th.
And Senator, on that point, you actually penned a letter to President Biden with your colleague about saying that the White House failed to notify Congress about ammunition being withheld from Israel. So the White House, they will not confirm that to us. They have not confirmed that. Now, have you received any confirmation that the Biden administration did, in fact, hold back ammunition from Israel?
We have not received confirmation yet, and you would think that a letter penned by 2 senators as they are sitting in Israel hearing these reports would receive a response, and yet we have not heard from the administration. So it's very concerning when President Joe Biden was pushing so heavily on the supplemental package just a few weeks ago, urging us to get this done because the issue was urgent. So we did pass the supplemental, including dollars for Ukraine, for Taiwan, for our own industrial base, and of course for Israel. And again, President Joe Biden, he is the one that said our support to Israel is ironclad, and yet here he is waffling on support to Israel. We should not be bending. We should make sure that Israel is able to defeat the terrorist threat, and especially at a time when they are being targeted directly by Iran as well. We should be stepping up and helping our partner and only democratic ally in the Middle East, Israel.
But, Senator, does it concern you at all that Israel did not provide the Pentagon or the White House with a credible plan on how its military is going to keep civilians safe before its troops started moving into eastern Rafah? Rafah is where more than 1 million civilians are sheltering.
Well, I don't know that that is true, because certainly as Senator Ted Budd and I were visiting with the Prime Minister, they were able to outline to us everything that they had done to warn the civilians in Rafah, to ask them to move to the north. And this was done days ahead of any action at Rafah. So they are giving plenty of warning to those innocent civilians that might be gathered in the south at Rafah. So I think we need to be careful with our messaging, understanding that Israel is very concerned about innocent civilian life. They're also very concerned about the hostages that are still being held by Hamas. And yet Hamas is using the civilians, they are using the hostages as human shields. So let's not forget who the enemy is. The enemy is Hamas. The enemy is Iran. The enemy is Hezbollah. Israel has been warning us. They've warned the civilians. They have told us of what their plans are. I think if we knew what the plans are, certainly those civilians knew what the plans were.
Senator, based on the meetings that you just had in the region, do you believe that what we're seeing is just the beginning of a broader ground invasion in Rafah, or do you think this is going to stay targeted as the Biden administration wants and has been pushing for?
Well, it certainly could be the beginning of a broader action, but then that is up to Hamas as well. Are they willing to negotiate and release those hostages? We need those hostages back home with their families, both those that are living and those that are deceased. They need to be brought home now. Hamas, they can also surrender. They can lay down their arms. They can turn themselves over to the IDF. That certainly is an option. But you don't see that happening, and you don't see our president pressuring Hamas to do that. We certainly don't see Egypt and Qatar working with Hamas, telling them to lay down their arms. Egypt and Qatar have got to do better. They've got to step up. And as far as Gazan refugees in the United States, again, something I disagree with. Even Egypt has not allowed refugees to come into Egypt because why? They can't vet that they are not Hamas. So I think that we need to be very wary of what President Biden is proposing, whether it is withholding ammunition from Israel or whether it is aiding and abetting Hamas in the Gaza Strip. We've got to put an end to it. We need to make clear that Israel is our friend and ally. Hamas is not.
Now, President Biden also signed an executive order in February that requires the state and defense departments to send a report to Congress stating whether Israel has violated any U.S. or international laws with its conduct in Gaza. So the deadline for that report is tomorrow. Are you expecting to get that on time, and what do you expect to be in that report?
Well, I do hope to see it. And what I expect is that, as I explained earlier, that Israel has most certainly tried to work around the civilian populations. But when, again, Hamas is using their hospitals, using other schoolhouses, when they are using innocent civilians in the Gaza Strip as human shields, we know that there will be civilian casualties. The point would be that Israel has been able to warn those civilian populations to exit those areas and provide for safe zones in other areas of the Gaza Strip. I believe that they have done that, but we certainly will look expectantly towards that report to make sure that they are following international law. But again, we need to stand firmly by Israel, and I'm afraid that President Joe Biden is sending the wrong signal by waffling about his support for Israel. We need to stand true. And again, once again, remember that Hamas perpetrated the attacks. They killed innocent civilians. They raped women. They burnt babies alive. They drug elderly Israelis into Gaza, and they still hold those hostages.
Senator Joni Ernst, thank you for your time. And the president, of course, did bring that up in his speech today to mark the Holocaust Remembrance Day.